call it vigilante justice or just good people sick and tired of being taken to the cleaners by brazen thugs. That video is what happens when liberal, lawless policies do what liberal, lawless policies do: fail. But get this, according to Stockton, California police, those two 7-Eleven store clerks are under investigation for assault. As for that thug, he is suspected of committing 2 other robberies at that same 7-Eleven within 24 hours of this viral smackdown. When the law means nothing and law enforcement officers are reduced to glorified babysitters, this is the America you get. But it's not just LA and not just New York City. These repeated and regular instances of lawlessness are the norm for all blue cities run by Democrat politicians, activist DAs, and bleeding heart liberals who care more about felons and thugs than victims and decent people. As a resident of Seattle, my next guest knows the song and dance all too well. So well, in fact, he's written a book about it. Joining me now is radio host and author of the forthcoming book, What's Killing America, Jason Rantz. Jason, it's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
And congratulations on the book coming out September 23rd. I know it's available right now for pre-order, and it's going to be a fantastic book. I mean, you're reporting on these stories really that nobody else in your area is covering. But I have to ask you right off the top, why do you stay in the Pacific Northwest? What is it that you love about, homelessness, crime, high taxes, regulations, climate change, extreme policies? There's got to be something there I'm missing.
Look, at the end of the day, this is a great city that has been destroyed by the radical left. And what I don't want to have happen is be chased out of my home by politicians and bad faith activists. And so part of me wants to stay here and fight for the city. I think if all of us took that posture, we would lose less of these battles, because the truth of the matter is, and I cover this in the book, is these bad policies and these activists, they don't stay in Seattle or San Francisco or New York or Chicago, Atlanta, DC. All of a sudden it starts to spread. And as a radio talk show host, I would hear oftentimes from listeners who would say, okay, I moved out of Seattle. I'm now in Enumclaw. I'm now in Tacoma or Everett, cities in Washington state. And they say, I don't have to worry about that anymore. But now they're saying, yeah, I do have to worry about it, because the bad policies on homelessness have been adopted elsewhere. And then all of a sudden, those exact same problems, the issues in schools, the issues with taxation, the impact of having an open border as it relates to drugs, it is infecting every single portion of this country. And for the few people who have not yet felt it, I promise you, you are going to feel it if we don't start pushing back in a meaningful way.
When you talk to people, obviously you live in a liberal area, I would assume mostly made up of liberals because that's how they vote. But when you talk to people and you get beyond the label of Democrat and Republican, conservative, liberal, are people agreeing with you in what you're saying when they see the stories you're reporting on? Are they thinking to themselves, you know what, maybe it's time to change the way we vote. It's time to maybe go a different direction. Or are they still so stuck in that echo chamber that they live in that they cannot see what's in front of their own eyes?
There's a little bit of both, and there's definitely been an evolution. So a few years ago, when the Capitol Hill Autonomous Zone broke out, for example, and I was on Fox covering it every single day, I was told that I was making it up, that I was exaggerating the crises on the ground. I'm like, I've got literal video that I am showing on television and I'm tweeting it out. I promise you, I didn't get someone from Marvel Studios to make the video for me. They just refused to accept it. And then when, of course, Black teenagers were murdered there, all of a sudden people started to step back and say, okay, maybe something else is going on. And over the years since then, you've had more and more people who previously were reluctant to agree with someone like me purely because I happen to be a conservative, because they truly understand that these issues aren't inherently political. They become political, right? Because politicians are involved, because it's a direct connection to policy that we can point to. But just talking about policing and drug use and homelessness and taxes, these aren't always just a right versus left, because at the end of the day, regardless of how you vote, we want to live in safe communities. You guys want to bring your kids to a park that's not overtaken by a homeless guy who's smoking fentanyl by the slide. You don't want your kid picking up a used needle, and you don't want to be taxed so high that you can't afford to live in a city anymore. And if you are going to deal with those taxes, you don't want to live in a hellhole. And there are a lot of people in Seattle, in Portland. Lots of folks have decided to leave Portland. San Francisco, exactly the same thing, that they said, look, I'm paying a lot to live here. This is not the city that I fell in love with. I'm going to go somewhere else.
Well, it makes sense. I mean, that's what I did when I left Los Angeles. And obviously, I've spent a lot of time in Southern California. I've spent time in San Francisco as well. And we always talk about California being so bad, and it is. But I spent time in the Pacific Northwest in both Seattle and Portland. And I got to tell you, almost worse. In fact, Portland might be one of the worst cities I have ever visited when it comes to the homelessness and the crime and the drug use. And I just don't know how cities like Seattle and Portland and San Francisco, how do they dig themselves out of this hole? Because these homeless people, they're not going anywhere. I don't look at the homeless population and think, boy, one day they're just going to wake up and they're going to decide to get clean, sober, and get a job. It doesn't feel like there's an end to any of this. And I'm wondering what you're seeing on the ground. Is there anybody that has a willingness to step in and truly begin to solve this homeless crisis? It almost feels like politicians don't want to solve it at this point.
Yeah, I think the reluctance from politicians is they would admit blame if they started to reverse course on some of the policies that are responsible. And ultimately, I don't think it's going to be up to any leader who's currently in place in any of these cities. We can't turn to them. They're not going to be able to do the job. The only way we're going to get any kind of resurgence of normalcy in these cities is new leadership. And what we started to see in San Francisco, for example, has been very positive. It's actually, again, part of the reason why I wrote What's Killing America is I want you to know why people believe what they believe, because once you understand the why, it makes it so much easier to convince other people to join you in your political fight. And what happened in San Francisco? They recalled Chesa Boudin, who was a George Soros-like prosecutor. He was a wannabe. He wanted to be worse than George Soros. Then you have the same voters, and these are not conservatives. There are like 17 conservatives in San Francisco who stepped forward and recalled the school board members who were available for recall because they stopped focusing on education. And instead, they focused on the wokeness. And folks there just said, look, enough is enough. And they made those decisions. Things are starting to get a little bit better in San Francisco. The problem with all of these changes, it takes a long time to get to a place where you're happy, where the crime is down, where drug use is low, where homelessness is generally controlled. But overnight, it can all go away. It's like a diet. You've worked 3 months to lose 10 pounds. You go to Vegas on a weekend, and then you gain 4 of those pounds back. And all of a sudden, you're like, oh my God, what did I just do? That's the problem here. It's going to take a long time. But we have to make those choices to say to a lot of these politicians, and this is on liberals in a lot of ways, just because they have a D next to their name does not mean they're looking out for your community. You have to move on from them. And we have to encourage people to step up who are more moderate, who can take control of these situations, and frankly, get rid of all the ideology. Ideology has a tendency to pervert these conversations and gets people to just think too rigidly. On a local level, the ideology doesn't matter as much. So we got to push it aside, because what we've seen right now, when you give ideology as much power as we have and the radicals behind it, they ruin these cities.
Well, I think you're right about starting at the local level. It's much easier and you're going to see much more impact when you start there. A lot of people don't want to because it feels like small potatoes, it feels tedious, but that's where places where real change actually can occur. But you know, when in thinking about this, it feels like some of these things are very solvable, like enforcing the law, for example, empowering your police officers. But you guys are in a position, especially in Seattle, where you don't have people wanting to sign up for that job. So, and I can't imagine why they would, by the way. Why would you want to live in Seattle and be a police officer when you know everything's going to be about race, everything's going to be about LGBT? You can't really do your job. You have to look at the perpetrator and decide what box they fit into, if you're going to react or not react in a certain way or manner. That's got to be incredibly frustrating. So how do you get police officers that want to sign up for the job, and then once they're in that job, how do you make it so the public outcry is lessened every time there's an incident, which usually, if you look at the full story, the police officers are usually acting appropriately, but the court of public opinion rarely sees it that way in liberal cities like yours.
Yeah, look, this one is going to be a very difficult putt. At the end of the day, you've created this cultural shift around how people see police. And if there's no general respect for law enforcement, on top of policies or laws that have passed that prevent officers from doing their jobs, I don't know how we expect anyone to step up. And the problem is the people who generally would step up in an environment where we said we're dismantling the police departments and we're starting afresh because of all the white supremacy and all that nonsense. Unfortunately, what you're going to get are folks who have no real personality for law enforcement, and you're going to get a bunch of woke 20-somethings who think that they can reimagine policing and change it in this left-wing image. And that's the real fear that I have. People don't want to work for police. And you've got departments here in Seattle, for example, this is absurd. You had, and I found this memo a few months ago, and I've been working on this story for months. You have the mayor's office demanding in marketing materials to get rid of the white people, to get rid of white men, to get rid of anyone who has quote unquote military bearing. And the intent here is they want to bring over folks who are, from communities of color because they want to reflect the community in which they police. So number one, this whole idea of your police department or any department reflecting the community from a superficial standpoint, I just wholly reject. If I'm calling 911, I don't need a Jewish white male to come and save me from the intruder who just broke into the house and is armed and I'm not at the time. So I just reject that. I think it's dangerous. But number two, they don't even want that anyway. When you set these kind of affirmative action goals, you mean to tell me that in a city that has, it's like 6.7% Black people, if we have qualified Black officers, but they're at 12%, we're going to cut that almost in half. And are we going to say because we have a qualified white person, but our force is 66% instead of 64% white, we're going to get rid of those folks? No, beggars can't be choosers, for one. So I would encourage everyone who wants to apply to actually apply. But when we're telling them that they're going to be the enemy, this is the situation we find ourselves in. Oakland is another great example where they've got a dearth of officers at a time where crime is surging. The NAACP just in the last couple of weeks, the local chapter, they're speaking out against radical left policies and the defund movement. And they're starting to at least try to change the culture around policing. And when that starts to shift in a positive direction, I think we'll start to see more people step forward. But again, you're going to have to get rid of a lot of these laws that have been passed around the country. Because if you're not going to allow police officers to be police officers and do their jobs, they're little more than people with targets on their backs now.
So Jason, in your book, What's Killing America, you talk about all of these things. We're obviously headed into an election year, a primary season. I think that Republicans thought crime was going to be a much bigger deal in the 2022 midterms. I think a lot of Republicans thought it was a winning issue if we talked about lawlessness and what's killing America. But unfortunately, it didn't reflect in these elections. It didn't reflect in the Republican areas that it should have, that there should have been a flip and people saying, look, it's lawless, it's horrible, we want our police officers back. It didn't have enough pull. So because you're the author of What's Killing America, you talk about what's killing the whole country, not just the Pacific Northwest. What should Republicans and what should voters be looking to as they get ready to cast ballots in 2024 as it relates to crime, their quality of life, their cities?
All politics is local. So the individual has to sit back and say, am I happy with the situation that I find myself in right now? Am I pleased with the crime situation? Am I okay with homelessness? Am I okay with the taxes I'm paying? Am I okay with the schools? And if whatever the answer is for whatever issue that's bothering you, if the answer is no, find out why. And in What's Killing America, I explain why. And then you're very easily able to say, okay, here's a policy that is responsible for the situation I'm in. You have to do a little bit of research. But once you find the policy, find out who's responsible. And the people who are responsible do not deserve your vote. And if the party that's in power in your community continues to back these policies or back these politicians, well, they made the situation for you so much easier. Go with their opponents. At the end of the day, we have all this power, but we've ceded it to a group of radical folks on the left, and they have destroyed our cities, and it's spreading. So I do think actually crime is going to still be an important issue, but so too will schools and just general quality of life. And I think from a national standpoint, it's a little bit more difficult when you're running for Congress and you're trying to figure out who to vote for. That's not always going to directly connect, but it does send a message that now you're saying, you know what, Democrat Party or the radical left of progressives who run a lot of these cities or areas, yeah, we don't want you in charge anymore. And if that means we're also dumping our member of Congress who identifies with the same party, so be it. Because if we don't make that kind of very specific and aggressive move, we're going to continue to lose this country, and it's going to go from what's killing America to what's killed America. And that's the part I'm trying to avoid.
Well, I give you a lot of credit for sticking it out. I mean, you lasted obviously far longer than me. I was in LA for a little over 3 years. And I decided it wasn't worth the taxes anymore. It wasn't worth what I was paying for. So I got to the beautiful state of Tennessee. But I give you a lot of credit. And obviously, we always appreciate you really exposing a lot of these stories. You're one of the only people that's out there giving us a true, honest perspective of what's happening in those regions. And I'm sure it can't be easy for you because you're outnumbered like crazy. But your book's available September 23rd, not too long from now. People can pre-order it now. Where's the best place for them to pre-order a copy?
I'm happy wherever you get it, but check it out on Amazon, Walmart, Barnes & Noble, Books A Million, wherever it is you get your books.
Well, congratulations on the book, and keep doing what you're doing, Jason.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.